In the last session of this unit, we began to look at relationships, because they are, as it were, the nitty-gritty of our spiritual life. It is, if you like, in relationships that we grow. Relationships are a risky business. They don't just happen. They have to be worked at. It's in them that we love. It's in them that we are loved. It's in them that we find God. In the first segment, Father Vince is going to look at relationships with the help of modern psychology and its relationship with the Church's teaching. And in the second part, I hope to look at them through the eyes of Pope Paul VI in his document, The Church and the Modern World.
The key category in spirituality is relationship. It's how we relate to one another, how we relate to the environment in which we live in, to the events of our lives, and also how we relate to God. We need to examine this critical area, and as Father John said, I will look at it from the perspective of the behavioral scientist, then he'll come back and look at it from the perspective of our rich spiritual heritage. It's interesting to note that all of the behavioral scientists, with the exception of B.F. Skinner, who holds to determinism, with that one exception, though, all of the others maintain that the human person is free, and the human person has a capacity to make radical choices. And in making radical choices, we also, though, become responsible for our choices. In the area of relationship, we have a choice that is really an either-or. It's a radical choice. It's not like choosing between, say, chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream. It's much more serious than that. And it has really very serious consequences in our own journey and in the spiritual life. We could, for instance, choose through a series of events in our lives to actually be unrelated people, which they refer to as the monological world. Or we could choose the other way to being related people, which they refer to as the dialogical world. Now, this is from the behavioral scientists, but it's really not very new. In Psalm 1, which is quite old, the psalmist tells us that there are two ways that the human person can go. One is the way towards goodness, and the other is the way towards evil. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas says that sin, the world of evil, essentially is about broken relationships. And so we could talk about the monological world, and those things that tend to move us that way would be really the world of sin. And likewise, we could talk about the dialogical world as the world moving us towards goodness, or the world which we could call grace. Now, as a person moves to the monological world, it's usually because in relationships we get hurt and we get misunderstood. We reach out, we try to love somebody else, and we experience rejection. Or we reveal something in part of us, something inside of us, maybe a secret of our life, hoping the other person will accept us as we are, and only find that we are rejected. And through that hurt, we can refuse actually to remain vulnerable in life and start to move over to this monological world where we build a wall around ourselves, a wall which protects us so that we're not going to be misunderstood anymore, we're not going to be rejected, we're not going to be hurt. Now, it's interesting because they maintain that when a person really moves into that monological world, they really can't get out of that world by themselves. It takes somebody outside of them creating an environment of warmth and trust and care and love to invite that person out. It's almost like thinking of, say, an iceberg, and the warmth coming from the person outside or from other people creates that melting effect and encourages that person to come forward again to take a risk, to come forward again to be vulnerable. Now, it's interesting when you really reflect on that, because we're really talking about the power of Christ inside of you, that each one of us has the power. It's incredible to think of it, the power to invite somebody out of this world where there is no meaning, This world, which is really the fruit of that world, is really loneliness, which leads to bitterness and cynicism. There's no real life. And yet, when you think of how that we have the power, and of course the question is, do we exercise that power with one another? Do we create that environment of warmth, of trust and care to invite somebody out of that monological world, the world of sin, the world where there is no meaning? Now, when you look at the other side of the coin, the world of dialogue, the world of relationship, there are some characteristics there which are really important to begin to see. One quality that they talk about is the quality of openness. And that openness means the ability to both give and to receive. I think many times as Christians we think of the Christian life as one of giving, 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 giving. And they raise a question because it is really a two-sided coin, the ability to both to give and the ability to receive. It's a consequence, as we said earlier, about being a pilgrim. We need one another. Now, some people who give all the time and find it very hard to receive are really fearful, because if I receive from you, then I'm making myself vulnerable. I'm really recognized and I'm really dependent upon you. And so I'm a little afraid of doing that. So I tend to give all the time thinking I'm charitable. But charity embraces both sides, giving and receiving. And so if a person's giving all the time without being able to receive, you have to raise a big question around whether they're really giving out of the true sense of love and the true sense of charity. Another aspect or characteristic of the dialogical person is somebody who really lives in the present. Now this is critical because we all know we have the past moment, we have the future, we have the present. In our rich heritage, we talk about the sacrament of the moment, that God is in the present moment. And the task is to both integrate the past and the future into the present moment. Most people tend to live in the past and future and avoid the reality of the present moment. Maslow, one of the great humanistic psychologists, maintained that few people have what he calls peak experience, because he maintains few people have the discipline to live in the present moment. You're all here, but you could be a million miles away. You could be thinking about going to the pub tonight. You could be thinking of a party. You could be thinking of going on vacation or whatever, and you're not here. You're physically here, but you're really not here. It takes a lot of discipline to remain present to the moment. It takes a lot of discipline to remain present to another person when you're really communicating. And so it requires discipline. That is really critical. And so we then find the behavioral scientists moving on to a new term. We have monologue and we have dialogue, and now we have this new term called duologue. And duologue is when two people come together, one waiting for the other one to shut up. Do you ever have that experience? You're pouring your heart out to this other person, and they're using all of the techniques, the eye contact and nodding and everything. You really think, boy, this person is really listening. And when you're finished, they come into the conversation with something that is a million miles away. They really weren't present. And how does that make you feel? And so you begin to realize how important it is to exercise discipline, to being present to each moment in this category of dialogue in the area of relationship. I could go on, but I think that it's more profitable if we now look back into our rich heritage. And Father John will share with you what this rich heritage in the area of spiritual theology has to say to us about this same category.